Republic of Ireland versus Azerbaijan. Live on Off the Ball.
And you're welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday here on News Talk. John Duggan with you through until 7 o'clock, because there's football all the way now until the end of the show. We're showcasing live commentary of Ireland's game against Azerbaijan from 5 with Stephen Doyle and Stuey Byrne calling the shots from the Aviva Stadium. Before the match, Football Saturday as always, broadcaster and journalist Johnny Ward with me in studio, and Dan McDonnell is already in situ at Lansdowne Road. You can text us 53106, tweet us at Off the Ball. We're streaming the conversation as well. Listen on News Talk, watch us on the Off the Ball social and digital channels for Periscope and Twitter at Off the Ball, YouTube, Facebook, and on the OTB Sports App. I don't know how you felt about the other night's game against Portugal. I certainly felt, folks, that it was the most enjoyable game I've seen probably since Euro 2016, since we played France or Sweden in the Euros, when things are really on the line. We're playing the 8th ranked team in the world. They have Ronaldo, Ruben Dias, Bruno Fernandes, Bernardo Silva, Diogo Jota in their team. We played with heart. We played with a bit of skill. We should have won the game, and then we got brilliance from Ronaldo, 2 headers. I view that Stephen Kenny should get a new deal. I think that we should give him the certainty and give the players the certainty that this is a long-term project, that we're building towards something here, that we're building good performances, we're playing football, and eventually that the results will follow. The results are obviously important, but I do think that we want to give the manager a bit of certainty. Maybe we have to wait for the next 5 games to see what happens, but I was really enthused that we nearly beat a team ranked so high in the world with an away victory the other night. Look at the ages of our players. Gavin Bazunu is 19, Omoma Medele 19, Adam Media's 20, Aaron Connolly's 21, Dara Shea's 22, Jamie McGrath's 24, Josh Cullen's 25. The under-21s won yesterday. I think there's green shoots, there's positivity. There was a bit of edge of the seat about the other night, and I don't know what you think out there, listeners, but that's my view, and Johnny and Dan, everybody else will have their views. 53106, you want to get involved in the conversation. It's the hot topic. It's the biggest show in town. We want the national team to be doing well, and hopefully the other night was the sign of something new. Johnny, how did you feel about it?
Pretty much all that, JD. Yeah, it's strange coming in here for a game against Azerbaijan that's, effectively almost a dead rubber, and after 3 defeats in the group, yet kind of so much hope and so much renewed hope really about this Irish team. The game the other night, I think Portugal, they had enough chances to win the game. Let's not argue against that. But just the way Ireland played, and the youth that was kind of, I suppose, the youth that they played, but also the youth that was imposed in the sense of making decisions and bringing on Omoma Medele. It was just so encouraging, augmented by the 21s, produced a really good performance yesterday against Bosnia-Herzegovina. And, the sight of Evan Ferguson coming on at the age that he is, playing against under-21s, yet looking like he's older than them. There are a lot of green shoots. I think the performance of Conor Coventry and Gavin Kilkenny for the 21s, but it's a funny thing, JD. If Ronaldo scores that penalty, and you fully expect him to score a penalty regardless of who he's taken on, let alone a 19-year-old who just made a terrible mistake. So you expect him to score. If Ronaldo scores that penalty, Portugal go on and win 2 or 3-0, which is very feasible. And as Ronnie Whelan said in commentary, there's absolutely no need to be passing the ball like that. And I think Stephen Kenny wouldn't disagree with that. What would the narrative be? Instead, we had this amazing game, really, that had everything going for it. A referee who almost seemed like he wanted Ronaldo to break the record, smiling as he booked him. 2 amazing goals from Ronaldo. But apart from that, a brilliant Irish performance in so many respects. And bear in mind, this is a performance where Stephen Kenny said Aaron Connolly is at 70% of his potential. I thought he had a really, really poor game in terms of what he can actually do, and he looked mentally and physically just off it. So we were half carrying one of our attacking players, yet we still produced that performance. And I've been really dying to come in on the show today. I've just been in such good form, which is amazing, really, because we've lost our first 3 games, and this game is strange against Azerbaijan because it's at once irrelevant in terms of the result, but we kind of need to win as well.
Yeah, we need to win with a bit of tempo. We need to play on the front foot. Dan McDonnell is at Lansdowne Road. And Dan, you were in Portugal. So Dan, what did you see over there in Faro that maybe the layman didn't see on TV?
Well, I think to be fair, John, I think there's a sort of there's a crossover in views. You did get a sense of a couple more things, even the extent to which maybe Matt Doherty was struggling in the second half. I'm not sure if that necessarily came through. At one stage Ryan Manning was changed to come on and sort of sat down. And that was, unfortunately, like the 2 late goals. Doherty was exceptional, but it came from that side of the pitch. Now, obviously, James McLean won't be happy with his role in the first one, but I suppose you got a slight sense of the momentum building. But no, it's sort of along the lines of really what was said there already. There was this sense that certainly the first 5-10 minutes there was this nervousness generally, and you're thinking, oh no, this is going to be a long evening. But really it was as the first half went on. It was the number of times maybe where you started to get hope, was just realising that Aviva was an outlet every time and fancied his chances every time. And I would have been critical of Aaron Connolly on Wednesday, but what I would say is that when Stephen Kenny spoke about this yesterday in the press conference and said that Connolly did a great job for the team in the sense that they'd identified this gap that existed between Pepe and Cancelo, particularly because Cancelo would be attacking so much. And okay, Aaron Connolly, you could see his execution was that of a player who maybe wasn't 100% sharp or happy at the moment, but he kept taking up the right positions, and that there was an element of a game plan there. And honestly, it's a weird game sometimes, that sometimes you're sitting in a stadium and you have your match report sort of written, and you're fearing the rewrite, but it's sort of Ireland are 1-0 up and you're thinking, okay, well, this isn't going to be the case really, something's going to happen. But it did get to around 80 minutes where it's like, yeah, it's not that they're comfortable, but it was just that Portugal were getting a bit frustrated at times. And I know they did keep the ball well and keep moving it, and that's what teams do. You see good teams score a lot of late goals because eventually the effort just leads to defenders switching off for that half a yard. But it did almost get to that sense where Bazunu made a big save from that free kick towards the end. You're thinking, this is actually going to happen. This really is going to happen. And just that sense of you couldn't help but have your eyes drawn to the bench, the Irish bench, when the winning header went in. And just to look at the body language, and really, after the first goal, there was anger that they couldn't get the subs on, that they've been trying to get on for a few minutes. But after the second goal, it was almost just that sense of desolation. And that's just the one thing you need to be careful of. I know we're going to move on and maybe talk about today, and I get Johnny's enthusiasm there, and I felt that enthusiasm after the game. But I guess we've had a degree of enthusiasm after the Slovakia game, albeit it was a heartbreaking penalty shootout loss. I'm sure if you played back the discussions after the Serbia game, there probably would have been a similar tone to some degree. Now this was obviously, I think, a better performance than either of those two, but it's the one little caveat there. We can sort of start to declare the corner turned, and then just realise that there is a game at home today. And not every player is caught up in the narrative, the discussion around, say, the future of the manager, that a lot of us are probably interpreting the discussion of the Irish team and looking at it through that lens. There are some players out on that pitch on Wednesday who may, who will be sort of in their 30s and well into their 30s, not that many of them, but when the Euro 2024 comes round, and the fact that the World Cup 2022 looks to be gone, that's a real punch to the gut, and that's something you just have to be very conscious and careful of here. That not everyone is looking at in this bigger picture view. Some players will always think they can win the next game, no matter what their attitude is. And they were probably thinking, they were engaged in the game, but there's part of them thinking, we're back in this World Cup campaign. And when you lose that way, there's just that slight apprehension that still hangs over this game today.
Yeah, I was reading Richard Dunn this morning, and actually in your paper, Dan, and I'll just give some quotes from it. The Portugal performance is brilliant. The team did really well. Everything that the manager spoke about in the previous games is evident in Faro. He went on to say, and yet it will only matter if the team put together some results now, starting on Saturday against Azerbaijan. It's all about results now. I don't think a good performance but unlucky defeat at home to Serbia is what we should be praising. Have you seen any difference between, say, Slovakia and Serbia first time with now? Do we have enough evidence, say, that the training camp in Spain or the work Anthony Barry's done is getting us to a better place, or do you still have to wait until see what happens at 5 o'clock today?
No, listen, I am pretty confident of that, but I probably might have been confident before the Luxembourg game as well too. So I have to sort of, as I said, I'm sure if you played back comments or sort of read out words from that time, you would have spoken that way. Now I do think the summer was significant. I know that people will always say that. If you ask them, do you think the summer camp was beneficial, they're not going to say no. You know, like they're always going to give a positive response. But I do think there is something in the fact that they, and this is more not just like press conference stuff, but certainly what I've heard myself, I suppose, you hear on the grapevine that summer camp went quite well. And like, you have to remember that there was some stuff going around, say last November, which I think, there was certainly a mischievous element to it about, unhappy camps and all this type of thing.
Video gates.
Yeah, the video gate stuff. Like, and I mean, there's no doubt that there was, there was spinning of versions of events going on there. But I mean, at the same time, the one thing I would say is that you did also hear that those camps were pretty miserable. Like, you had sort of COVID issues hanging over it. Players couldn't really mingle, they couldn't really mix. And the one thing that Stephen Kenny did do when he came in was he pretty much changed the entire staff, the backroom staff. Now, I think that was ultimately, if you're going to support a manager, and I'm going beyond Robbie Keane here and that stuff. I mean, just all the way down to sort of kit men and all of those people that players would be used to. And that was a lot of turnover in a small period of time. And then you go into a camp situation, September, October, November, where people are sort of confined to their rooms. There's not as many familiar faces around. There's some new faces coming into the camp. And you did hear that it wasn't necessarily a great time. And to be fair, I think Stephen Kenny probably verified that to some degree in some of his answers. And then you had sort of the Videogate fallout, and sort of a couple of people leaving. But it does appear that actually what the summer allowed them to do, and Matt Doherty spoke about this yesterday, was just for people to spend a bit of time around each other, get to know each other a bit more, get to know the staff, get to know some of the characters, not in a pressurised environment where you arrive in and there's a game in 2 days, or 4 players have been lost to COVID and all of this is going on. And they also had a really good coach in Anthony Barry coming in, who was just arriving in from winning the Champions League, who joined the group. And it does seem like there was genuine benefit to that, and just getting to know some of the characters. It might take a while to just get to know them and fully understand how they work. And I think, like, you did hear stuff in the grapevine, not this like some of the bigger picture stuff going around, which was just, as I said, I think there was a mischievous element to it, but I think there was little changes around the hotel and how they do things. And I mean, Stephen Kenny has mixed things up again this week and has brought the team out of Castleknock, their normal base, into town, to stay in town, to train in the Aviva the day before the games, to try and make it feel a bit more like home. And these are all the things about putting your stamp and putting your own personality on proceedings. And I think that's the stuff that I do think, if there was a 10-day camp in the summer and things were very bad and people weren't happy with how things are going, there's probably still elements around that could have managed to get that information out in some shape or form. Didn't happen. And I think that's would fill you with a small bit more encouragement that maybe there's a buy-in there, there's a belief there. And I think you saw that in the performance of Wednesday. But in saying that, it has to be backed up today. It does. I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with the thesis that like the result against Serbia, like the absolute bottom line result against Serbia is part of, well, if you play badly and don't win, well, it's a disaster. I think you can explain that as part of the growing up process and then transition process. But I do think a game like this at home to Azerbaijan, where you've got whatever turns up to 25,000 or so people, and it's a test that is similar to a test you faced earlier in the year and failed. To represent progress, there needs to be more sense of control and awareness of how to deal with the challenge of breaking down a team that might defend against you. Because I think Stephen Kenny has proved that for sending a team away from home and having a game plan to compete away from home against a decent side, I think he's proven he can do that. But clearly there's another side to that, which is being able to rather than surprise people, with your sort of approach, your sort of brave approach as an underdog, it's to be that little bit more dominant at home. Because I did make the point in my preview in the paper today that possibly the games that were the biggest driver for change in terms of people deciding they needed something different and wanted something different was the home games here against the likes of Georgia and middle-ranking teams, where you're seeing teams come here and control parts of the game, and that it made it a hard watch for people who were going to matches. And I think people would expect something different from a game like this.
Yeah, I think the fan experiences at the hurling final, Limerick and Cork, and I really was so attuned to the fan experience and enjoying something again. more so than they would have been before the pandemic started. This is the first game with fans since November 2019. It's Kenny's first game with fans. Matt Doherty was fascinating yesterday, speaking about that his performance improves with supporters there, and their temperature, their response is going to be so vital now going forward for Stephen Kenny and his players.
Yeah, today will be an interesting litmus test, JD, to see how they respond to this team, because I've had people text me who were massive Stephen Kenny doubters who have basically turned the corner after the game the other day, and I think everyone who watched that game that I've spoken to, a lot of them doubting Stephen Kenny and doubting this or that, was really encouraged by it. I think that'll be events in the stadium today. I think they're going to get a very good reception. You got to remember how many of these players are young, and even look at the midfield that was kind of half thrown together the other night. McGrath, Cullen and Jeff Hendrick. I mean, I was looking at this midfield and I was like, this is really concerning, but that's basically all we have here. And the performance that they put in, and then you have, Adam Ida, who could become something of a cult hero down the line, and just the bravery of the way they played. And I absolutely loved Bazuna in the sense of, like, get up and get on with it. He made a mistake with the short pass, but he got up and with the the world watching to some extent, he just saved a penalty from Ronaldo. And Ronaldo gave almost no mention after the game about Ireland's heroic performance, but he did kind of congratulate Bazuna apparently leaving the pitch, and it was a brave effort. And I think Dan's point is very valid. Stephen Kenny's, I think he's sort of alluded to the fact that he's kind of learning on the job a bit as well. He found out maybe in that Luxembourg game that they couldn't produce performances back to back in a window like that. He will change it up today, but the tempo will be completely different with 25,000 people there, because the Luxembourg game, the longer that went on, it was almost like playing in to the sound of ghosts and the train going by in the dark. It was an eerie atmosphere. You could probably sense, I wasn't at the game now, but you could probably sense the unease of the players on the pitch. And I think, like, when we talk about Stephen Kenny potentially getting a contract, I think the narrative has changed since the Delaney days, where it was kind of more qualify for the tournament at all costs, and Delaney's FAI was more about kind of high profile managers coming in. As much as he was involved in Stephen Kenny coming in, it was high profile managers. We now have a coaching team that could be very interesting, and what I'm hearing about Anthony Barry as well, JD, there's so much talk about Stephen Kenny, very little about Anthony Barry. You look at Darragh O'Shea when Darragh O'Shea was injured the other night, look at the body language between Andrews, Barry and Stephen Kenny about who to bring on, which was the teenager Mohamed Mandela. They're basically looking at Barry rather than Stephen Kenny, and he is kind of a go-to man in terms of tactical situations. Really, really good reviews of him. And when I look at what the 21s did yesterday and some of the players coming through, I think we're nowhere near the team Stephen Kenny could have longer term. That's the point. I think a lot of these players wouldn't be playing if he had others available and if others had matured. And I think the road ahead, it could be very, very bright. And let's kind of have a little bit of faith in them. And I think that will be showcased by the fans today. I think they'll get behind them from the get-go.
If you ask me who won the transfer window in the UK, it was Chelsea, because they got Lukaku in. I think United, when I saw them last week against Wolves, I still think they're a bit out of shape, even though they've signed Ronaldo and that. I'm just fascinated, Dan, how senior is Anthony Barry's role at Chelsea under Tuchel? Because this is a club, this is a manager, these people are going places.
Yeah, so Anthony Barry's role, JD, he was hired by Frank Lampard previously, and the connection there, Anthony Barry was previously working at Wigan with Paul Cook, but it ended up on the same pro license coach as Frank Lampard. So and apparently was a top student on that pro license course. He was the one that sort of stood out in terms of a lot of his presentations. So when Lampard went to Chelsea, he took Barry with him, and there's sort of he has been very much described as a set piece expert, and like that was a big part of his brief. He's very much responsible for set pieces, and Chelsea had a very good record in set pieces in the Lampard era. But I've also spoken to some people who've sort of said, well, don't pigeonhole him as that as well, who'd be sort of familiar with his work, that there's a lot more to it. But when Lampard went, all the coaching staff pretty much went, but Barry was retained, because already I think word had got round the club and with the hierarchy that this was a young coach that they shouldn't really allow to leave the building. So Tuchel has retained him, and I do think he retains that key role in the area of sort of set pieces and planning in that respect. but he is still beyond that. Like, he is a coach as well, who is part of their inner sanctum, their inner circle. Like, I think, if you look at the Chelsea staff list, I think there's maybe, there's a couple of coaches listed, and he is amongst them. It's not like he's down the list as a number 9 or number 10 or something, or he's in the background sort of doing bibs and cones. Like, he's very much to the forefront of it. You can see him on the sideline when, in the dugout when Chelsea are playing. So it was something of a coup for Stephen Kenny to get him in, and it's a bizarre. I mean, Damien Duff is unbelievably well regarded. You speak to people who are involved and at underage level who've worked with some of his teams, and very intense and very dedicated, and clearly the feeling would have been that losing Damien Duff was a massive blow, but it hasn't necessarily, and it's not any disrespect to Damien Duff, but it hasn't turned out to be the case, because they've ended up bringing in a coach who, coaching wise, doesn't have the pedigree and the name recognition and the face recognition, but in terms of his coaching work and where he's working in between international camps, like, it is at a really high level. And certainly, again, you talk about messages coming out of March and June, I think the players really took to him as well too. Really good character around the place, and I've no doubt that's a big factor. And I mean, again, this was something that Stephen Kenny and actually Rory Higgins, his former scout, is now the Derry City. This was something that they went and they were the ones who brought in Anthony Barry rather than say the FAI doing it. So I think they did well to execute and get in that high calibre candidate.
Very much at home is Leona Maguire, just as a breakaway in the Solheim Cup. The Cavan native and Mel Reid are 2 up in their match against Nelly Korda, the best player in the world, and Jessica Korda. This is in the Saturday foursomes, the opening matches between Europe and the United States and Ohio. So the United States are up in 2, Europe are up in 2, and Leona Maguire up in her match. Great to see her starting so well in the Solheim Cup. The audience beginning to speak about this, obviously, as we would expect. 53106, the text number for a cost of 30 cents. You're getting way ahead of yourselves. Portugal still battered Ireland. Kenny's not up to the standard of coach required. Will struggle again today. Not alone is Connolly not up to the standard required, but he goes to ground way too easily, which gets the referee on the team's back. Definitely let Kenny continue, says Dermot. It was a brilliant match, John. The lads really played their hearts out. It showed how much wearing the jersey means to them. Me and my hubby Sean are driving up to the match at the Aviva. Come on, Ireland, we'll enjoy the day. Hi lads, what's the rush in giving Stephen Kenny a new deal? Maybe after a run of wins. On the Portugal game, sometimes it's easier to play well against a top side. Bigger test this evening, says Sean. Robinson for Connolly, who was and has been terrible for 18 months now, and that's a team to get behind. No more McLean, but Hendrick still has a role, says Sean in Sligo. And another one of our texters, I'm in full agreement with Johnny Ward. The naysayers don't seem to be able to see past their nose at the long-term project. All they seem to want is qualification at all costs, just so that every decade or so they can get rid of the credit unions to go away for a few weeks, waving their shoes in the air, drinking cans for breakfast, dinner and tea, viewing success, not getting into fights and picking up their own litter, things normal people take for granted, while hopefully watching the team get a plucky draw or victory in the third group game, says Jamie in Roscommon.
It's interesting, Jamie's point there. I get where he's saying, and I often go back to the game in Cardiff where we won 1-0, and it was one of the most poisonous footballing performances by a winning team I've ever seen. And people were celebrating at that game because, rightly, it was a big win. Now it set us up for a bit of a fall against Denmark. But Stephen Kenny's on the record as saying he didn't really enjoy watching Ireland when he was younger under, we'll say, the Jack Charlton days. Now, the Jack Charlton days, I don't think anyone you couldn't say a word against Jack, but now we're at a stage where we're not particularly good, and we also were playing very bad football. But this goes to a deeper thing, all of the underage teams, JD, now, and we have, there's a totally different DNA coming up in terms of young kids in Ireland. These underage teams are basically kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, more or less, in terms of playing nice, attractive football. All of the underage Irish teams I've seen playing over the last few years, particularly Kenny's 21s, have been playing a very nice brand of football. And that's kind of that change. You can't then have an international team that play basically to try and get 0-0 draws away from home and to try to win the game with 30% possession and so forth. So I think Kenny is quite brave, and I've said this before. It's not that he's reinventing the wheel. It's just that he's trying to inculcate a little bit of self-belief in players who for so long have been effectively told by successive managers that they're not really good enough to achieve by playing on a level playing field of technical quality football. And we have have very, very good young players coming up. We have probably a lot more pace coming up in some of our underage teams, and pace is such a big thing. That's why Aaron Connolly was dangerous the other night, despite the fact he wasn't playing well. And we had the situation where we have a 19-year-old kid from Tala who was able to overcome, like, playing a bad pass like that and save from Ronaldo. And I suppose what really encourages me is teams are built on defences primarily, and we could have, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say Gavin Bazuna has the potential to be an outrageously good goalkeeper, but the number of centre halves that we have coming through as well, I mean, you forget Collins is there as well. Obviously O'Shea got injured. We have so much in terms of the bedrock of the team. If we can sort out midfield and look at a striker coming through as well, like maybe Ida, maybe Connolly, maybe Troy Parrott, it's hard not to be a little bit excited. But like I've been fed up of watching Ireland for years, to be honest, JD, playing a horrible brand of football, and we've been pigeonholed in Europe as a typical bad British team that can't really play, up and at them, score from set pieces and all that. I'd like us to be a lot more than that, and I know from talking to Stephen Kenny when he got the job, he wanted us to be a lot more than that.
Well, Fernando Santos was saying that, the Portuguese coach, before the game. He was kind of comparing us to a British team, and he's the man who didn't really have the shape the other night. Ireland did. But I suppose, Dan, being there, Ronaldo, the movement for that second goal was sensational.
Yeah, I mean, like, I suppose it's one of those things you will step back in time and go, I mean, you did witness history. Just, I mean, could have done with the 1-1 maybe history as opposed to the 2-1 version of it. But it is greatness, it is, like, I mean, it just almost was like it was scripted, the whole thing. Just how it actually, how the conclusion sort of was reached, because again, like, he was terrible for large parts of the game, like, he was sort of drifting around the place. You could see people getting frustrated with him, even sort of tactically for Portugal. I think he was even inhibiting them a small bit at times, because he was sort of, now I know they're quite fluid with their movement and the forward players that they have, but certainly you could see he was sort of getting a bit almost getting a bit anxious, getting a bit frustrated, and I mean, the Stephen Kenny said afterwards, I don't think many other players or anyone else could have scored that second goal. And I was like, really? I mean, but then you do watch it back and you just think it is that. It's almost very hard to explain what it is. It's just that, like he always seems to be the one that's in the position when the ball comes into the box. But, like, obviously that's not a fluke. Like, that's not a coincidence. They know if they can sort of loft it to a particular department, he can hang back and find the vulnerable position as far as the opposition are concerned, and even just the athleticism to sort of get enough power on the ball. Because it wasn't necessarily running onto it in such a way that there was natural power from his angle of attack. He almost had to generate it himself too. I mean, yeah, from where I was sort of diagonal angle behind it. I mean, it really was one of those you couldn't have any questions about Gavin Bazunu for it. I mean, it is extraordinary to see it happen. I mean, it's just an extreme version of that line about how you sort of tolerate these strikers, who might do nothing for 90 minutes of a game, but then they score. It's like people, it's a different level, it's a different grade, I suppose, although not really. But look at someone like Robbie Keane's record. I mean, there would have been games in Ireland, where in general play, Robbie Keane may not have done that much at times, but then at the end, I remember his game against Georgia where he scored twice to win 2-1, and it does help to have those players in your ranks. I mean, and Robbie Keane's goal scoring record is for his country is amazing, and yet Ronaldo has got 40 goals more or something. Now, granted, like he's been playing for a very good side for all of his international career, pretty much, but he did, and it's almost. You could get into this discussion before that game the other day about, in a strange way, with all the young talent they have and the ability they have, is this focus on Ronaldo holding them back in some way? Like, will they be liberated when this all-powerful celebrity presence who, like, dwarfs the rest of them, even if they're global stars in terms of his own status, and yet, like, he is the one that just drags them out again and again. And, like, you even think you go back to Serbia, their game with Serbia in March. Now, they drew 2-2, but he had a goal disallowed at the end, which shouldn't have been disallowed. Like, that's, the two biggest games of the group so far. Who's popping up in injury time to do something? It's Ronaldo, and that's I wouldn't say privileged to be there is the wrong word, because it didn't necessarily feel like that at the time, especially when you have to torch a match report you've just written. But like, in the passing of time, you do realise. And I did a piece last week speaking to players who played against Ronaldo, various Irish players, and good players as well, who have played against. Who could list off a litany of superstars they've played against that people will be happy to play against one of them, and yet there is this sort of elevated standing that Ronaldo has, and I'm sure even in time, Gavin Bazunu and Andrea Mobile-Badelli, I'm just looking at the two of them walking out on the pitch here a few minutes ago. What an experience, what a life experience for them at 19 years of age to be in the middle of that. And yeah, it didn't work out the way they would have wanted, but it's exposing you to situations at the start of your career that can only stand to you later on.
Just got a text in here, interesting text, and I'm kind of thinking to myself as well, because I didn't really see him track back. Obviously you just very well eloquently articulated, Dan, the brilliance of Ronaldo, but Paul Pogba for me is a luxury free player for Man United who needs that freedom to be at his best. We saw that in the first couple of games of the season. I thought against Wolves they were out of shape, and then Ronaldo is the degree of luxury around him again up front for United going forward. Somebody's been in touch. How will Bruno Fernandes and Ronaldo work for United? Fernandes was non-existent on Wednesday. Was he non-existent, Dan?
Yeah, no. See, the thing about it is they're so stacked in terms of their attacking talent, Portugal. That this was the encouraging thing from the Irish perspective, that it became apparent that if you could play one or two passes out, you suddenly realised they were very committed, because they played Ronaldo and Rafa Silva and Jota. And so Bruno Fernandes quite naturally ended up being sort of deeper. Now he obviously was taken down for the penalty, so he wasn't completely anonymous. He was involved in what might have proved to be a significant event. But it is a case of there is an overpowering presence that Ronaldo has in that side, that the others are sort of the actors around that, and it probably suits Jota to some degree in terms of how he operates. But certainly for Bruno Fernandes, it's just that more is asked of him, maybe going the other way, and he's maybe asked to almost been expected to maybe try and control games from midfield in a way that doesn't it's not necessarily how you would describe his play at Manchester United sometimes. And that's why during the Euros, not directly why, but Renato Sanchez was picked ahead of Fernandes during the Euros, because Renato Sanchez, when he's in full flight, is almost much more box to box, and is just a different type of player, but was more suited to what Portugal demanded from their midfielders at that particular time. Now we did hear that Fernandes was very influential in trying to get Ronaldo to Manchester United, and to be fair, they, as much as they've been exposed to each other on international duty, that is still in bursts of 7 to 10 days or whatever. I know that he does have 33 caps, to be fair, so it's not like they haven't had a lot of experience together, so maybe that's making too much of an excuse. But you would think, still being at the same club, they can find a way, find more of an understanding. But I think it's just that the Portuguese squad is in some ways quite top heavy, and maybe Fernandes at times has been a victim of that in terms of what's been asked of him. Okay, we got to take a break. Dan McDonnell at Lansdowne Road and Johnny Ward here in studio on OTB Football Saturday. Our preview ahead of our commentary of the Republic of Ireland against Azerbaijan. Stephen Doyle and Stuey Byrne calling it from 5. We're on the air until 7, and we're back after this.
Republic of Ireland versus Azerbaijan, live on Off the Ball.
Andrew, welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday here on News Talk. John Duggan with you through to 7, because we got live commentary of the Republic of Ireland against Azerbaijan with Stephen Doyle and Stuey Byrne from 5 here on News Talk. Just to let you know about the Solheim couple, Leona Maguire, what a start she's made. She's playing really, really well. She nearly chipped in there from a bunker, and her partner and her, Mel Reid, they're 2 up through 12 on Nelly Korda and Jessica Korda. So at the moment in the opening foursomes of the Solheim Cup in Ohio, the United States are up in one match, actually 2 matches are all square, and Europe are up in 1. So they're tied at the moment. So USA up in 1, Europe up in 1, including Leona Maguire's match, and they're all square in 2. And Max Verstappen is on pole for the tomorrow's Grand Prix in Holland, the Netherlands, only just by 0.038 seconds. Lewis Hamilton is alongside him on the front row. Earlier than we might have expected, we got the teams, I believe, from Lansdowne Road for the Republic of Ireland against Azerbaijan. Our match commentator, Stephen Doyle.
How you doing, John?
Good, yourself?
Very good, thank you. It's a nice, warm, cloudy evening here at the Aviva Stadium. Afternoon, I should say, but as you say, UEFA usually getting those teams into us about 90 minutes before kick-off, so they are in. I can tell you, John, there's 3 changes to the Irish team that started against Portugal on Wednesday. James McLean coming in for the injured Dara O'Shea, and then it's Jason Malumbi replacing Jeff Hendrick. and then it's Troy Parrott then coming in for Jamie McGrath. So 3 changes there to the Irish team, John. It looks like, well, listen, you can debate this with Dan and Johnny, but he could stick with the back 3 that he played the other night, and that would have Seamus Coleman coming in alongside John Egan and Shane Duffy, and then play James McLean as a left wing back, Matt Doherty as a right wing back, and then sticking Josh Cullen and Jason Malumbi in central midfield with Connolly and Parrott playing off Adam Ida. He could of course play with a back 4, and that would see possibly Matt Doherty going the right hand side, and I should say Seamus Coleman the right hand side, Matt Doherty on the left, and then just playing James McLean as an attacking midfielder. But as I'm just discussing here with John, Azerbaijan, they've been playing with a back 3 in recent games, so I would say he'd match their formation, so most likely Seamus Coleman playing in that back 3 alongside Egan and Duffy. But it is exciting to see Adam Ida playing with his 2 old under-21 buddies, Aaron Connolly and Troy Parrott, in this starting team.
And Stephen, we also have the opportunity maybe for Callum Robinson and Alan Brown to play a part after they were named yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think Callum Robinson could be a key figure today, John, because he is bang in form. It was interesting to hear Stephen Kenny saying in his pre-match press conference yesterday that he'd gone over to see, we know he'd gone to see a lot of matches, but he had specifically seen Callum Robinson playing for West Brom, and one of the matches I actually watched myself live that night against Sheffield United, he scored along with Darragh O'Shea, but he scored in his opening 3 championship games, so he's a man in banging form. So I think bring him on off the bench, we could definitely see some goals from Callum Robinson, CR7 as some people like to call him now. But obviously that wasn't a good night for John Egan playing for Sheffield United. They got beaten 4-1, but listen, hopefully he'll be on a winning side today.
And you're seeing fans back at the Aviva Stadium for the first time since November 2019. What's the vibe around there at the moment, Stephen?
Yeah, I was actually I drove up through Balls Bridge coming up to the stadium, and some of the local watering holes had a lot of fans out with green jerseys, green tracksuits on, all their FAI gear. It was a bit like, actually, because I was commentating on the Bose game.
I was just going to say there's going to be a Bose reference here, JD. I mean, the Aviva was heaving for the Bose matches as much as was legally possible with 8,000 people. So for Ireland games,
on those European nights, it was great just seeing fans outside having a drink and refreshing themselves. But as I said, there was a few early starters out today wearing their Ireland kits and all that kind of thing, and it's just so nice to see, and it's going to be fantastic. 25,000 supporters. I think if we put in a performance like we did on Wednesday night, there's going to be a huge reception from the supporters. I know Dan was writing in the Independent in his preview for the game that could be a real key factor today, just the supporters, their reaction. And look, if they get some good football here, I think they'll get right behind Stephen Kenny's Ireland team.
Well, Stephen, if Johnny Ward is allowed to mention Galway United in every single OTB Saturday, you're allowed to mention.
Well, I saw him last night, John, funnily enough, because I went to Stradbrook myself to see Cabinteely playing against Johnny's Galway United. It was a good night for Galway, not so for Cabinteely.
Good night for your dog, Steve. Brought the dog to the game.
Yeah, tell us about the dog, Stephen.
I brought Frankie to the game. She's at home now at the moment, actually, with her 1988 Euro 88 Ireland top on at the moment, waiting for the match tonight. But Frankie got a great reception from the Cabinteely supporters who were all out cheering on their team down at Stradbrook. I think they were getting more entertainment out of her than they were out of the match for the first 45 minutes. It did get better in the second half, I should say. Poor old Cabinteely missed a penalty in the second half after actually poor old Kieran Marty Waters got injured in that game. Hopefully he gets well soon. I hope he's okay. He did come off the pitch all right, but a good win for Johnny's Galway anyway, John. That was the main thing for him,
and a deserved rest for Frankie this afternoon back in Shea Doyle.
Frankie was a cult hero at the game, JD. I mean, everyone was around Frankie. Now granted, it was at half time. I was actually thinking Frankie should have come on for the second half because the players were playing that badly, but Frankie was just loving the attention.
Frankie, do you remember me?
But Johnny's envious because that attention is normally around him at League of Ireland games, JD, so that's the problem.
Yeah, so like a load of kids trying to pat me and stuff, like, but yeah, if it wasn't the case of Frankie goes to Hollywood, Frankie goes to Stradbrook, but yeah, anyway.
Listeners, if you're just tuning in, and we're all okay here. Dan, Troy Parrott, big night for him.
It is, yeah. It's I'm trying to get my head around the sort of the possible shape. I'm sure Stephen Kenny will do his pre-match, and he'll probably reference it. It is possible it could be a back 4, but when you go through the permutations, you would think, that's a lot of changes. And as sort of Steve-O referenced, Azerbaijan do play with 2 strikers. I think the criticism of Kenny against Luxembourg would have been playing 3 centre halves against 1 striker, and sort of, it wasn't necessarily the most aggressive or positive play, but maybe against the team with 2 strikers, they think they can manage it with the back 3. So It's an interesting one. It's not necessarily a team I would have predicted, particularly probably the retention of Aaron Connolly, and it's not a reflection of his performance. I just thought he actually looked gas when he went off. So it's an interesting one because they did play together in the 21s, as Steve-O referenced. It would have been Ida, Parrott and Connolly, but again, it was like different. That wasn't with a back three, that was with a back four. So it would almost be at times a 4-3-3 with sort of Connolly on the left and actually Parrott more withdrawn as the number 10. And then Connolly sort of got bumped up to the senior team pretty quickly, and Parrott actually would have played off the left on occasion. So I kind of wondering what way they're going to go with it. It is possible that it is just similar enough to the other night with Parrott sort of slotting into Jamie McGrath's role. But it could be something a little bit different as well too. It could be like Connolly and Ida together is a sort of a positive enough move, and maybe Parrott does just drift off the right and play a bit narrow, and they look for the width to come from the wing backs again, with Doherty switched to the right and McLean on the left side. But yeah, I'll be interested. I mean, before we finish the 3 to 5 slot, Stephen Kenny will do some kind of pre-match interview, and we'll see if we can sort of get a handle on what the thinking is. But definitely, like he was very conscious of the issues of energy and not wanting a sort of lethargic and flat display. And I would, Darragh O'Shea's gone out of the team, Hendrick has gone out of the team, and Jamie McGrath. Now O'Shea's obviously injured, but Hendrick and McGrath, perhaps their exertions on Wednesday meant they just wanted to freshen up things in that department.
My criticism of the other night, JD, was I didn't agree with bringing on James McLean. I didn't see what he really offered us. I thought Portugal, and it would be something like Kenny to do, like when you're kind of under pressure, to go for the juggler a bit. And I thought if he brought on someone like Parrott, that we would have an outlet, because they were on the ropes defensively. I mean, that was the occasion throughout the game. But James McLean coming in today is interesting. I struggle to see us playing 3-5-2 with those players coming in. It doesn't really add up to me, so I think there's going to be some variation of it, and it'll be interesting to see if he does mix it up, because I thought, I think Anthony Barry may be a fan of the 3-5-2, but it did work well the other night. This is a completely different test, obviously, but just with that team, I kind of struggle to see how exactly he's going to play 3-5-2 unless Parrott is in a very, very central role, which I kind of doubt.
Well, I don't know, Johnny. I mean, who's your back? Where's Matt Doherty playing then in that scenario? And James McLean, if you're talking about back four, and you could be right. Like, you could be right, but I just you've got if you're thinking about Matt Doherty. Like, you've got Matt Doherty, if you think he's at left side, you've got James McLean, and you've got Aaron Connolly, three very left-sided players, if you know what I mean. If you're thinking Doherty is playing left back, there could be McLean at left back and Doherty on the right side of midfield potentially, but actually you look at it, I mean, it might well be that it's three at the back, or else it's more of Aaron Connolly will identify as a sort of a striker sometimes, but it's not really a 4-4-2 with Ida and Connolly, because whereas Parrott, it may well be that it is a version of three at the back, just looking at it here, or else if it's not three at the back, I think Matt Doherty probably needs to be playing in midfield, so that's certainly one to bear in mind.
Parrott's fascinating, JD. He's been in proper goal scoring form, and I'm not all that worried sometimes about levels. I think if players are playing, it's just so it's just so beneficial, particularly with his kind of his age and so forth, and he is a proper natural goal scorer, which at this stage Aaron Connolly isn't really, and Ida's obviously getting there, but I think it could be a big day for him.
Yeah, just some listener comment here on 53106. We would all like Ireland to play free-flowing, tippy-tappy football, but we just don't have the players. We only have one or two actually starting in Premier League teams. Most of the squad come from teams far below that standard. Since he came in, Kenny regularly has to fill up places in squads with semi-pro players from the League of Ireland. You're dreaming if you think those players can turn into Messi, Ronaldo just by pulling on a green jersey, says Colm.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that? I mean, there's been no semi-pro players from the League of Ireland called in, you could make the argument about James Talbot from Bows, but I mean, James Talbot is full-time, so I mean, that's not the case. I do think there's a sort of a simplistic perception of Stephen Kenny's vision sometimes, that it's this tippy-tappy stuff, and the alternative to that is like some kind of, bark, bollock and bite stuff, like as though they are the only two options available, that you play like Spain 2010, or you play like Ireland in the 1990s, and as though these are the two versions that are being presented to people. I just don't think that's true, and I don't think it's typical of Stephen Kenny's career, if anyone has followed it in any with any closeness, and how his teams operate. I was sort of writing about this. Like, Stephen Kenny has often executed plans similar to Wednesday, where yes, you accept that the other team will have the ball a lot because they might be superior, but you just show a bit more bravery and imagination in your passing rather than just lumping it and getting rid of it all the time, because that's a more pragmatic way of doing things. Like, sometimes pragmatism is keeping hold of the ball, not just getting it out of the way as far as possible. And I do think, I think there's a very interesting debate to be had around whether Kenny's philosophy is right, but I do think sometimes it's presented in a way that's not, it just doesn't tally with reality. It's not about tippy-tappy. Stephen Kenny has always had teams that have been quite direct at times at the right moment, but it's about not just ceding possession for the sake of it. And I think that's a difference between that and just tippy-tappy. But clearly, what I would say, to be fair, to slightly argue with myself, I think with some of the home games at the Aviva, there has been sometimes bad possession and possession for the sake of it, and that's what needs to be addressed today.
So just to recap on the team, folks, if you've just joined us, Gavin Bazunu in goal, Seamus Coleman, Shane Duffy, John Egan, Josh Cullen, Matt Doherty, Adam Troy Parrish, James McLean, Jason Malumbi and Aaron Connolly. So Troy Parrish, Jason Malumbi and James McLean coming into the side.
Probably a 3-4-3 maybe.
I'm thinking it's 3 at the back,
yeah,
isn't it?
A 3-4-3 with Coleman,
McLean and Doherty as the wide players.
Coleman coming in. It's an aggressive enough team. Dan, if in that 3, because those, as you mentioned, those 3 lads have played up front ample times for the 21s, so they've been involved. Like, does he then put Parrott in the centre with Ida and Connolly either side, I wonder?
Well, like, it could be a 3-4-1-2. I mean, that's the thing. That is a potential option. I mean, I think if you look at the Hungary game in March and June, that it did start initially with sort of Parrott, and it was almost a 3-4-2-1, and it actually worked better in the second half when it was 3-4-3 with Horgan and Knight either side of Ida, and that they almost started like that the other day with a narrow McGrath, Connolly in a sort of 3-4-3. So I think you could be right there, but it's obviously the order of the front 3 and even the back 3 as well. They mixed things up a small bit the other night. The Duffy was actually central, with Egan and O'Shea either side, whereas previously he had used Egan as the central one of the back 3 as almost a sweeper and a good passer coming out, but they clearly probably felt with the Ronaldo angle they needed to do something a bit different and have Duffy in the middle, and I wonder would they I suppose they might mix up, but we can talk about it after 4 anyway.
Okay, Donald from the Irish Independent. We just got to take a break. Johnny Ward in studio. Stephen Doyle and Stuey Byrne are going to be on commentary duty. We're extended show until 7 o'clock here and Off the Ball. Live commentary of the Republic of Ireland's World Cup qualifier against Azerbaijan. You can get involved in the conversation. We have so many people involved already. 53106 our text number for a cost of 30 cents. Go with the Kenny plan, but don't expect Coleman, McLean and the other plus 30s to be part of it. Kenny will be phasing them out, says Brian. And definitely agree with yourself and the boys, John. It's been a tough couple of years. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're going in the right direction. Our calibre of player is not the strongest, but they are young and they are so promising, says Adrian and Leash. We're back after the news. Stay with us.
Republic of Ireland versus Azerbaijan, live on Off the Ball.
Back to Off the Ball Saturday here on News Talk. John Duggan with you through to 7 because we're showcasing commentary of the Republic of Ireland and Azerbaijan from Lansdowne Road. Kick off at 5. Stephen Doyle and Stuey Byrne providing the call from the Aviva Stadium. We've also got the Irish Independents, Dan McDonnell and Johnny Ward here. So Johnny Ward is in studio. Dan McDonnell also with the lads at Lansdowne Road. Just to go through the team, the Republic of Ireland team named for this World Cup qualifier. Stephen Kenny hoping first win of the campaign. Gavin Bazunu in goal. Seamus Coleman, Shane Duffy, John Egan. Then we've got Matt Doherty, Josh Cullen, Jason Malumbi and James McLean. Troy Parrish, Aaron Connolly and Adam Ida. Stewie, what do you make of the shape of the team and the personnel picked by Stephen?
I like it. I think he's going to stick with a sort of a 5-2-3 sort of a system. The two being Cullen and Malumbi sitting in front of that sort of either whether it's a back 3 at any stage or it's a back 5. I think they give that sort of central protection, that rear guard, and it just gives the. I think it creates if you think of that back 5. If you well, this is how I think they're going to play. I think it's going to be Coleman, Duffy, and Egan as a central 3. McLean like a left wing back and Doherty like a right wing back, and they'll almost form a sort of arc at that in front of Bazunu, sort of a protective arc, and then Cullen and Malumbi will sit as 2 central midfielders, and they're pretty much their brief will be to break up any central play, get on the ball, whether it be deep, and get us playing, get us ticking over. And obviously Connolly, Ida and Parrott, I think you'll see very similar to the way we set up the other night. Connolly was a huge threat down that left-hand side. I know he was quite erratic at times when he did get possession of the ball, and he did get quite a lot of possession. He was kind of our outball the other night in the first half, wasn't he? But he caused us troubles, and the thing is, he gets himself into situations all the time, into dangerous situations, into goal-scoring situations, and it can only be a matter of time, through either him getting regular football. It can only be a matter of time that I think he'll start converting those opportunities into goals. Well, that's the hope, of course.
You were on commentary with Nathan the other night, Stewie. The dust has settled. You've had a few days to think about it. Where do you feel we're at the moment?
I think we're in a good place, I have to say. I've never commented on a more emotionally charged game than the other night. I really haven't. Never. I just felt it was extraordinary. And it was it was great to be part of it again. I got a huge buzz out of it. And coming into today's game now with the crowd coming back, I actually walked into the ground thinking, you have to feel the sense of a crowd in a stadium to know it gives you that sort of that sense of responsibility on your shoulders. And I think Stephen, in a way, probably needs this as well to kind of be able to bounce to get something back from the crowd, because for a year now, or for even longer, we've been coming to the Aviva, and he's been coming here and other grounds, and there's been nobody around, and it's almost like it's very surreal. But I think more importantly, there's a tendency to forget why it is we're doing all this and who it is we're doing it for. And when you get crowds back into the ground, and you walk into the ground and you start seeing faces everywhere and there's people everywhere, it's a reminder of who you're responsible to. And I think it's in a good way. I think that's in a really good way, because the more the crowd sees Stephen and he sees them, I think it'll be a huge benefit to him in what he's trying to do in this Irish team.
We talk about tempo and the Luxembourg game and having a lot more of that this evening, but what you're saying there, that'll just naturally happen given the people around you. I think so. I think he's been dying for this. I think he really will look at this as being the opportunity to kind of put on a good show, to maintain the course that we're on at the moment. I'd like to think that Stephen would have felt after the game the other night that there was probably more people on his side than there would have been before the game. That's open to debate, but that's certainly the impression I got. And I've always felt that in these three games, this game was huge because we're at home, there's a crowd. We have tended to struggle at times playing against lesser opposition, not to be disrespectful to Azerbaijan, but we've tended to struggle when we've been the favourites at home, and we really need to kind of I just feel we need to put on a show today to kind of really kind of cement that kind of goodwill towards Stephen. Dan, Azerbaijan, what's the report card on them? That's the briefing book, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, they similar to Ireland. They've lost 3 games, all by a solitary goal. And in recent years, their record has been that of a team that doesn't win many games, but is capable of drawing quite a few. And they're sort of generally involved in sort of tight enough low-scoring games. They don't concede huge amounts of goals. They're not a team, albeit they're the bottom seed in a 5-team group. I mean, generally you might have a 6-team group, so the 6th team would be a really weak one that you'd be looking to hammer, whereas Ireland just ended up in a 5-teamer. So they're not I don't think you say like they're a sort of a terrible side, but they're average. They're an average team. They played Luxembourg during the week. I suppose if you're looking for a form guide there, the most recent one, and they were 2 down at half time. Now their coach went for a bit of a strategy for that game of pretty much starting with most of their home base players in the team, and myself and Johnny have both been over to Azerbaijan to watch Karabag play, who are a decent side, but actually Karabag, they have a lot of bought-in players like Spanish players and stuff like that. So there's only like a handful of players, say, who there's maybe 8 or 9 Karabag squad members, but only a couple would be in their first team, if you know what I mean. So their best player is the striker. I'm actually just looking at their site. He is in. It's Maher Amreli, who plays for Legia Warsaw. He's, as we know, is sort of a proper force. They've been involved. They're going to be in group stage football this year, and he plays outside of the country. I think 5 of their squad play overseas. The rest play in Azerbaijan, and he would be the stronger player. I'm just looking. Maxim Medvedev, their captain, he's a sort of an experienced guy. 31, is sort of over 70 caps. But they've also brought in a defender who plays in Poland. That's the number 18. Anton Krivitsuk. I'm sure Steve will have his pronunciation bang on with all this stuff. But they are a team that, I think I was looking, their best ever qualifying campaign was one when they drew 6 out of 10 games, and that's how they tend to operate. They can be hard to break down, but they're not necessarily a team that plays with a great amount of abandon. Their form card would suggest they will try and make things difficult for Ireland today, rather than even Luxembourg, to be fair to them, did try and press on a bit at times, and they weren't a team who parked the bus, whereas Azerbaijan might have a bit more of a tendency to do that.
So Stewie, how do we break them down?
We have to start with a really high tempo, John, to be quite honest with you, and I think that I don't think Ireland are the type of team that are able to go through the gears when we're haven't either started well or we're not playing quite well. I think we're a team at this particular moment in time, and we have to start the game with real intent, full of energy, aggression, and ball possession. Use the ball quick, move the ball quick. I don't think we did that in the Luxembourg game here, which was hugely disappointing, and we allowed them, Luxembourg, to kind of get in at us and ultimately did one over on us. So it's hugely important here that there's high energy from the start. I think there will, I think the crowd will have we're going to hear the Irish roar again. It's been such a long time, and the Irish supporters have been a huge part in the past of being able to galvanise the team when things might be a little bit flat. So it might actually be quite a difficult first 10 or 15 minutes for the Ireland team in how they're going to sort of maybe manage their emotion, because we don't know as of yet what kind of atmosphere it's going to be, but we have to expect that it's going to be fairly hopping. We've seen in other games that despite the fact that maybe attendances are down to 50%, 25,000 people can make a hell of a noise, so hopefully that is the case.
Yeah, Johnny, the families there, just the whole experience of being a player in that environment. Matt Doherty was speaking about it yesterday, that it will lift him, it will lift the players.
Yeah, and the thought that some of these young players have not played in front of Irish fans before. I think the national anthem will be quite highly charged today. To see Gavin Bazuna belting out Oran Naveen the other night was, I don't know, was inspiring. And there's no relationship between this team yet and the fans. You just haven't been able to see them, and it is quite a new team, and I think they would have been able to help them in that Luxembourg game. There were players who were it was one of these kind of nights where things were going against them, and it can still be a special place. I suppose a lot of us might prefer the atmosphere in the old ground, which was a bit of a throwback, but I was at those Bows games in Europe, even with 8,000 people. There was a very good atmosphere in the Aviva Stadium, and I'd hope that fans who are going today, many of them who wouldn't be regulars at League of Ireland games, will be able to enjoy being back at a football game, because it's been so rare, and that is a seriously attacking team, and it's going to be on the front foot from the get-go, and we've a lot of sort of outballs in terms of pace and all that. I think they're going to be very entertained, and JD, what could a 3 or 4-0 win or something like that do for the national? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what could a big goal scoring win do today? It'd be amazing if we could get an early goal and get going early, because I think the players will go in there with a very positive attitude, and I think it'll be a good entertaining game.
Well, that's what the United did. It infused us with optimism that we're carrying into OTB Football Saturday now, and hopefully by 7 o'clock this evening we'll have more.
These players as well, like Parrott, Connolly and Ida, I don't think you should underestimate what they did for the 21s. Some of particularly the 2 Sweden games that Kenny was in charge of, they produced these amazingly good attacking performances in games where, I remember in Tala they were losing and they battered them 4-1, and they play with a lot of attacking intent, and it's going to be interesting. Set pieces are going to be interesting as well, because Jay McGrath and Conor Horan would be the obvious two. They're not there, and Jay McGrath's corner for the first goal was amazing really the other night, so that's going to be interesting. But I think to a degree these players, they're not burdened with that sort of negativity maybe about their ability that other Irish players might have kind of had to deal with down the years.
I just think though, like there's two sides to that. I mean, the 21 stuff is relevant to a point, but we've seen like how it's been hard for them to translate that, and you would hope that understanding that they have, it's an easy transition. But I would stress, I'm just looking here, I mean there's 4 players, Bazunu, Malumbi, Aaron Connolly and Ida haven't played in front of a crowd at the Aviva Stadium before. Troy Parrott did, because he would have been involved a handful of times under Mick towards the end. Like, it is a big deal, it is a big day for these lads, playing in front of their families and friends and stuff, and it can be highly charged. But I mean, Stewie, as well, like sometimes you play in it's a daytime kick-off, you're a team that's sort of hard to break down. There's a great energy in the opening minutes, but then it can just become flat very easily too as well, and it becomes pressurised, and you're looking at these young lads to sort of take control of the game and provide the creativity. That's the one thing that would strike me looking at it, that if Cullen and Malumbi are there more so to mind the house a bit maybe sometimes, and even let the wing backs get forward, you are looking at those front players to really take control of the situation. And it's one thing having the ability to do it, but it's another thing to be able to sort of to take it on in front of your own crowd, who all of a sudden, if things start slowly, a couple of passes are intercepted, there's a few oohs and ahs, and it gets a bit sort of nervy. Whereas in Portugal, you were in a slightly different role as the underdog, and you didn't have that expectation and demand. So I think it's just a little note you have to say here. I mean, I really hope it clicks, but that's obviously the other side of it.
Yeah, I think there's loads in that, and a sort of kind of what I was alluding to when I was talking about that first 10-15 minutes. It's going to be highly emotionally charged. It's hugely important that the Irish team get off to a really good start, that they get into their flow really early, and that for the young players, especially the likes of Connolly and Parrott, as simple as it may sound, I know these are professional footballers, but they're still young, and even down to the most simple things like their first touch, their first pass. Let me put it this way. I think the other night in the game in Portugal, the first time Connolly was able to break away, I think whether Matt Doherty might have got him away, I don't know if you remember, he kind of overran he took a couple too many touches over, and he overran it, and he kind of ran it out of play, and a bit sloppy, and I'm just thinking, if that happens today, what's the reaction going to be like? I think he's the kind of guy that just gets on with it, and to be fair to him, he did the other night, and he for all the kind of poor touches he might have had, I still thought he was a big threat the other night. I thought he's loads to offer, and I think it's something that will come in time. But it's a very important point. You don't want, I'm not necessarily picking on Connolly, but maybe Connolly and Parrott, you don't want their first sort of 10-15 minutes in the Aviva in front of a crowd to be negative ones, because it can have a lasting effect, so I think it's hugely important that we do get off to that positive start, that the crowd are behind the team, and they make themselves known to be behind the team, and hopefully the moaning and groaning doesn't come at all, to be honest.
You're going to have it, I suppose, the moaning and groaning. We're getting texts in here, 53106. In the past, the likes of O'Neill and Trapp were asked to do a job, i.e. qualify. That was their job. They weren't given the time Kenny knows he has. Well, I don't know if he has it. If they've got no wins or 6 or 7 competitive games, they would have been sacked, says Stephen in Dublin. In the unlikely event we fail to beat Azerbaijan, is it clear we need to move Kenny on? What point to decide it's not working? Anybody else will be sacked, says one of our texters. Plenty of listeners proving Irish fans are the greatest world is a myth. They should be backing Kenny, an Irishman who's come through their own league, is bringing through young Irish players. A lot of the anti-Kenny brigade are anti-League of Ireland. That's hard to change, says Tom in Cork. Lads, I wouldn't care if we lost every remaining match in this campaign, as long as we see good football being played and progression on the pitch. All of the naysayers texting in are obviously couch potato Premier League fans who don't have football in their hearts.
I agree with all that.
So John and Sligo.
Last two texts I agree with.
Yeah, but as I said, if Bazuna's mistake costs us a goal, I mean, there still are question marks about the suitability of some of our, playing out from the back and stuff like that. It was very, very high risk stuff the other night, and I don't totally subscribe to this. It's a League of Ireland thing. It's not a League of Ireland thing. Regardless of what you think, Stephen Kenny's experience coming into this job is a hell of a lot less than the managers that preceded him. And I respect people who think that he may be out of his depth. I don't agree with that. I think he's a very good coaching staff behind him. But let's try to analyse stuff beyond our results, and let's look at the way we're trying to play. And it's philosophy that at once is positive, but it's also a philosophy he believes, I think, can bring us very good results. And that's the point. It's not about looking pretty and not achieving. Like, he does firmly believe in these players, and I think that's a break from previous managers, and that there's more faith in young players coming through and faith in the players that are there.
I think there's a point to be made there. Like, I think it was the first text, and in fairness to the first texter there, I don't know if I'm picking it up wrong, because they did talk about if O'Neill and if McCarthy had done this or if Trapp, but they were brought to do a job. But I think that's like a really important point. Like, they were hired to do a job. They were paid in some cases 3 or 4 times as much as Stephen Kenny has been paid, by an association with a sort of a particularly around the time of O'Neill and Trapattoni, they couldn't even afford to pay all of the managers' wages themselves. Like, it's a very different time. It was a very different mindset. It was a very different approach. And I think for people, I understand that, like, sometimes you can follow football all the time and you can be very wrapped up and engaged in it, and the great joy of the national team is that it's the people's team, and they will drop in and out of it, and they're not reading every report and following every bit of every movement in detail, and they might just turn on the Ireland games with the expectation, well, they should be qualifying because they've qualified before. But this always was going to be something slightly different. Now, this has never been stated by anyone. This is something I probably would have said myself, that maybe the way things were going, you need at some stage to write off a campaign. Now, that's a hard thing to do, and I heard Brian Kerr speaking the other day about it's another 4 years till the next World Cup, and it is hard to stomach, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, for older players for whom there will be no more World Cups, certainly. But there was a recognition that maybe if we were going to change our national team for the better over the long run, that there would be bumps in the road, there would be difficulties along the way, and when that happened, there would be noise, and there would be people comparing it unfavourably with managers who qualified in the past. And listen, you have to accept that that's the case, but this is also a World Cup group. It's a World Cup group. In a Euros group you can finish third and get a playoff. In a World Cup group you can't.